Hey, it's Echoes of the Unwritten. Today, we're opening a reel most people never get to see. Rare, uncensored footage from the Battle of Okinawa. And by uncensored, we don't mean sensational. We mean the version without the tidy edits. No filters, no "we'll fix it in post," and definitely no slow-mo hero shots. This is what combat cameramen actually captured. Raw, immediate, sometimes uncomfortable. Why Okinawa? Because this island, late spring 1945, was the last, bloodiest doorway before a possible invasion of Japan. What happened here shaped decisions that reshaped the world. We'll talk strategy, yes, but mostly we'll look at faces. Exhausted, determined, terrified. Soldiers, civilians, people. The story lives in their eyes more than in any map. Quick promise, we will not glamorize any of this. We'll give context, we'll blur nothing in the facts, and if I crack a tiny joke to keep us breathing, it won't be at anyone's expense. Think of it as a history seatbelt, a way to process heavy truth without losing our grip. One more thing, viewer discretion, not for shock value, but for honesty. These long-hidden clips survived censors, humidity, and time. They deserve careful eyes and a steady heart. So, take a breath. What you're about to watch is history with the volume turned all the way up. If you're ready to see what war actually looks like and why it should never be casual, let's roll. Let's rewind a little. Before the first soldier stormed the beaches, before the kamikaze planes fell from the skies, Okinawa was just Okinawa, a subtropical island of farmers, fishermen, and families. But by 1945, this quiet stretch of land became the most important piece of real estate in the Pacific. Why? Because whoever controlled Okinawa would control the doorway to Japan itself. From the American side, the thinking was simple, though not exactly comforting. The war in Europe was ending, but the Pacific theater was still a nightmare of island hopping. Okinawa, just 350 miles from mainland Japan, was the last and largest stepping stone. If the Allies could take it, they could launch an invasion of Japan's home islands. Without it, they'd be fighting blind. Now, for the Japanese, Okinawa wasn't just another island. It was the final wall between the US military and Tokyo. The Japanese High Command knew they couldn't outgun America, but they believed they could outbleed them. If they could inflict massive casualties, make Okinawa hell on earth, maybe, just maybe, the US would think twice about invading Japan itself. Spoiler, it didn't quite work that way, but we'll get there. And then there's geography. Okinawa wasn't a barren rock. It was big, about 60 miles long, with mountains, forests, and natural caves. The perfect place to dig in, hide artillery, and force invaders into brutal close combat. The Japanese army spent months turning the island into a fortress, carving bunkers into hillsides and tunneling deep underground. Imagine Swiss cheese, but the kind that shoots back. So, by spring 1945, the stage was set. The Allies with overwhelming firepower and a desperate timetable. The Japanese with nothing to lose and everything to prove. Between them, nearly 500,000 civilians who had the misfortune of being born on the wrong island at the wrong time. That's the context. That's why Okinawa mattered, not just as a battle, but as a decision point for the rest of World War II. And the rare footage we're about to explore, it shows what that decision looked like when it stopped being strategy and started being survival. So, what exactly do we mean when we say rare, uncensored footage? Well, picture this. During World War II, combat cameramen, yes, actual soldiers carrying cameras instead of rifles, were right there on the beaches, in the trenches, and sometimes in the middle of chaos. They filmed everything. But here's the twist. Not everything they filmed was meant for public eyes. The US military wanted to boost morale back home, so when the newsreels played in American theaters, they were polished, heroic soldiers charging forward, crisp flags waving, dramatic narration. You didn't see the things that made mothers cry and politicians squirm. The blood, the fear, the wounded crying out for medics, those reels were tucked away, censored, or destroyed. Because, let's face it, nobody in 1945 was going to buy popcorn and Coke to watch that. That's what makes this footage rare. It's the stuff that slipped through the cracks, survived humidity, mold, and time sitting in metal cans and forgotten archives. Some of it was declassified decades later. Some came from cameramen who saved copies for history's sake. And when you look at it today, it's not just about bombs and bullets. It's about the faces. You see the exhaustion etched into Marines' eyes, the terrified glance of a child pulled from a cave, the shock on both sides when survival was the only goal. This is raw history, before the censors, before the edits, before the narrative spin. These reels let us see Okinawa the way the people who lived it saw it, chaotic, human, unfiltered. And trust me, once you see these frames, you'll never think of the words battle footage the same way again. On April 1st, no joke, April Fool's Day, the largest amphibious assault of the Pacific War began. Only it wasn't funny, not even a little. More than 180,000 US troops launched onto Okinawa's beaches in what looked like the world's deadliest beach party. Tanks rolling off ships, Marines splashing through the surf, Navy destroyers firing thunderous salvos just offshore. At first, it was eerie. Many soldiers expected the kind of withering machine gun fire they'd faced on Iwo Jima. Instead, silence. Just the sound of boots in wet sand, the metallic clatter of gear, and nervous breaths under steel helmets. Some troops joked nervously, maybe they all went home. But everyone knew better. The Japanese weren't gone, they were waiting. Here's where the footage becomes jaw-dropping. The reels show men unloading supplies, setting up command posts, and looking over their shoulders with that something's off expression. Then it hits. The Japanese had chosen not to defend the beaches, but to fight inland from fortified ridges and cave systems. Within hours, Okinawa's hills lit up with artillery. Mortar shells rained down. The silence broke into chaos. Combat cameramen caught it all. Marines dragging wounded comrades through mud, corpsmen pressing bandages against wounds that wouldn't stop bleeding, explosions throwing earth and men skyward. And through it all, mud, smoke, confusion, faces stare into the camera, exhausted, frightened, grimly determined. These weren't movie extras. These were young men realizing the island was going to eat them alive before they even reached its center. The opening days at Okinawa weren't the bloody slog of trench to trench yet, but the footage makes it clear. The storm was only gathering. And for the men on both sides, the question wasn't just who would win, but who would still be standing by the time the island stopped burning.
If the landings felt like chaos, the weeks that followed were pure misery. The Battle of Okinawa wasn't just fought on open ground, it was waged in mud, caves, and trenches that seemed to stretch forever. This wasn't the Hollywood version of war where everyone looks sharp and heroic. No, this was dirt under fingernails, sweat in your boots, and a smell you don't forget. The uncensored reels show Marines digging foxholes in ground that turned to soup every time it rained, and it rained a lot. Helmets weren't just for bullets, they doubled as makeshift buckets to bail water out of the trenches. Soldiers slept sitting up, clutching their rifles, with mosquitoes as their lullabies. One clip even shows a young soldier trying to eat his rations while swatting flies off his face, looking like he'd rather take on a tank than another spoonful of army beans. But the worst part? The caves. The Japanese had spent months tunneling into Okinawa's hillsides, creating an underground fortress. When US troops tried to flush them out, the fighting was brutal. Flamethrowers turned black openings into firestorms. Grenades rolled into caverns came back out, sometimes with a split-second fuse left. The footage captures these terrifying moments: smoke pouring out of rock faces, men crouched low, waiting for a counterattack that could come from anywhere. And it wasn't just soldiers inside those caves. Civilians, whole families were crammed into the same tunnels. Some begged for mercy. Some were forced by the Japanese military to stay put, and others were caught in the crossfire. The reels show children blinking at daylight after days underground, their faces pale, their eyes wide with fear. This was the reality cameramen weren't supposed to film, the kind of truth that made censors nervous. War wasn't just a clash of armies, it was survival in mud, stone, and smoke. Every frame of these reels reminds us, life in the trenches wasn't just dangerous, it was dehumanizing. And yet, somehow, men and women endured. They dug in, they pushed forward, and they carried the unbearable weight of each day. The deeper the Americans moved inland, the tighter the noose became. And with every step, the footage shifts from weary endurance to raw desperation. Because in Okinawa, even the ground seemed determined to fight back. Here's the part of Okinawa's story that rarely makes it into the headlines: the civilians. Almost 500,000 Okinawans were caught in the middle of this clash between two superpowers. And for them, the war wasn't about strategy or honor. It was about staying alive one more day. The rare footage shows villagers running with whatever they could carry: bedding, pots, a single chicken under one arm. Some wandered aimlessly, looking for shelter. Others huddled in caves, pressed shoulder to shoulder in the dark. Imagine being a farmer one week and suddenly finding yourself trapped underground while bombs shake the walls around you. That's not just history, that's terror you can almost feel through the reels. And here's where it gets truly heartbreaking. The Japanese military spread propaganda that surrendering to the Americans would mean torture and death. They urged civilians, even children, to commit suicide rather than be captured. Some families jumped off cliffs together. Others used grenades distributed by soldiers. These moments were rarely spoken of at the time, but the uncensored footage captures the aftermath. Bodies at the base of cliffs, possessions scattered in the dirt. No narration can soften that kind of truth. The Allies, for their part, did try to establish safe zones, setting up refugee camps. The reels show tired women and children under makeshift tents, clutching water rations and waiting for food lines. But with artillery raining down daily, safety was a relative term. In total, it's estimated that more than 100,000 civilians died during the battle. To put it in perspective, that's nearly a quarter of Okinawa's population at the time. These weren't nameless statistics. They were neighbors, classmates, shopkeepers. And the uncensored film is one of the only ways we can still see them as people, not numbers. So when we talk about Okinawa, we're not just talking about soldiers and helmets. We're talking about an island community shattered in just a few weeks. Their story preserved, not by choice, by the relentless eye of a combat camera. By May, Okinawa wasn't just a battlefield, it was a grinder. Every hill, every ridge, every cave was contested like it was the center of the universe. The Japanese High Command had ordered their troops to hold out at all costs, and the Americans, determined to break through, threw everything they had at the island. The result? A climax that looked less like war and more like apocalypse caught on camera. The reels show it all. Artillery pounding ridgelines for hours on end, the earth itself trembling from the bombardment. Then the silence breaks as US Marines push forward, only to be met by ferocious counterfire. The Japanese strategy was simple but devastating. Wait,
hold, and unleash hell at point-blank range. And above the island, kamikaze pilots dove from the skies in waves. The footage captures one kamikaze streaking across the horizon, slamming into the USS Bunker Hill. The explosion lit up the sea like a light, sending smoke and fire into the sky. It's one thing to read about it in a history book. It's another to watch it happen, frame by frame, knowing men were trapped inside those burning decks. By late May, the Americans advanced on Shuri Castle, the heart of Japanese defenses. The castle itself, an ancient Ryukian structure, became a fortress. The reels show smoke billowing as shells reduced centuries of history to rubble. It wasn't just a military target, it was cultural destruction caught on film. And then the toll on soldiers. The cameras linger on gaunt faces, hands shaking as cigarettes are lit, eyes staring into nothing. You can almost see the moment when exhaustion turns into something deeper, numbness. One officer famously described Okinawa as a suicide of a nation. Watching the footage, you understand why. By June, the Japanese lines finally collapsed, but at unimaginable cost. Over 12,000 Americans dead, 94,000 Japanese soldiers gone, and civilians caught in between. The footage doesn't shy away. It shows Okinawa for what it was. Not victory or defeat, but survival bought with blood.
So, salmon does have iron in it, but it's not a lot. There's better sources of iron. When the guns finally fell silent in late June 1945, Okinawa was barely recognizable. What had once been a green island of farms and fishing villages was reduced to a wasteland of rubble, smoke, and silence. The uncensored reels capture that eerie stillness. Abandoned helmets scattered in the dirt, the skeletal remains of homes, and long lines of civilians clutching whatever they'd managed to save. For the American forces, Okinawa was technically a victory, but one so costly it hardly felt like triumph. Over 12,000 American lives lost, more than 36,000 wounded. Japanese military losses were staggering, around 94,000 killed, and the civilian death toll exceeded 100,000. It was, simply put, hell on earth. And here's where Okinawa's legacy becomes world-changing. Watching the footage, it's not hard to see why US leadership hesitated at the idea of invading mainland Japan. If one island cost this much blood, what would Tokyo or Osaka look like? President Truman later pointed to Okinawa as part of the rationale for unleashing the atomic bomb. In other words, these reels don't just show the end of a battle, they help explain the end of the entire war. For Okinawans, though, the battle was more than a military campaign. It was trauma that echoed through generations. Entire families were wiped out. Sacred cultural sites like Shuri Castle were reduced to ash. Survivors rebuilt, but the memories never faded. Today, memorials dot the island, honoring not only soldiers, but also the civilians who had no choice but to live or die in the crossfire. The rare, uncensored footage ensures they aren't forgotten. It reminds us that history isn't just numbers in textbooks. It's faces in the rubble, voices silenced too soon, and stories preserved one shaky frame at a time. So, after all the mud, fire, and heartbreak, what do we do with these images? Why should we watch uncensored footage of one of the bloodiest battles in history? The answer is simple and also heavy, because forgetting is easy, but remembering takes courage. These reels don't just show explosions and strategy. They show the cost of war written on human faces. They show soldiers, some barely out of high school, aging a decade in a single month. They show mothers carrying children through smoke and chaos, choosing survival over despair. They show the rubble of Shuri Castle, a cultural treasure lost in seconds to artillery fire. This is history without the makeup on, and maybe that's exactly how it should be remembered. Now, I promised you a touch of humor to help us breathe. So here's a thought. If Netflix made a series about Okinawa, you'd probably get the usual dramatic angles, stirring music, maybe even a love subplot. But the real footage?
It's messy, shaky, sometimes out of focus, and yet it's infinitely more powerful because it's real. When we watch these uncensored frames, we're not glorifying war, we're bearing witness. And maybe, just maybe, we're reminding ourselves why peace is worth fighting for in every generation. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, share it, comment, remember, because as long as these images survive, so does the truth they carry.